Darlington Solves Its Storybook. Part 1. The Price of Freedom. Isla grew up in a small town where the rhythm of life was predictable, almost too predictable. The streets were lined with old trees, and the houses were well kept, with flower beds neatly arranged in front of every door. People smiled at each other on the sidewalks, stopping for casual conversations, sharing news and gossip. It was the kind of town where everyone knew everyone's business, and nothing ever seemed to change. But to Isla, it felt like a cage. She was the kind of girl who always felt out of place. While other kids seemed content with their routine school, family dinners, sleepovers, Isla felt stifled by the simplicity of it all. She was a good student, had a few close friends, and didn't have any obvious problems. But inside, something was always restless. Something that couldn't be defined by the small world she lived in. As she entered high school, the feeling of being trapped only grew stronger. Her parents, who loved her deeply, had high hopes for her future. They had worked hard to build a stable life and expected Isla to follow a similar path. But Isla couldn't see it. She didn't want to follow the path they had laid out for her. She wanted to create her own, one that wasn't mapped out by anyone else's expectations. Her rebellion started off small, skipping a class here, sneaking out late at night there. She'd make up excuses for why she wasn't home at curfew, or why she had missed a test. She began to hang out with people who didn't care about rules or what others thought. These were kids who weren't afraid of getting into trouble. They smoked, they drank, they took risks. At first, Isla just watched from the sidelines, but soon, the allure of their free-spirited attitude sucked her in. She wanted to feel the rush of breaking free from the limitations she'd always known. One night, while out with a few of her new friends, Isla found herself in a small, dimly lit party at a house on the edge of town. It was the first time she had seen a group of kids her age completely unrestrained. They were doing drugs, drinking heavily, and laughing without a care in the world. It wasn't the fun she'd imagined, it was something darker, something wild. She watched them, fascinated, as if they were living the life she had always dreamed of, the life she thought she was missing. She joined in. A sip of alcohol, a drag of a cigarette. It felt freeing at first, intoxicating. For the first time, Isla felt like she could breathe. The walls she'd built around herself, those walls of responsibility, expectations, and fear, began to crumble. She felt alive in a way that no amount of schoolwork or family dinners ever could make her feel. But the more she gave in, the more she craved that feeling. It became a cycle, a pattern she couldn't break. Every night was a new adventure, a new chance to escape from the mundane. She started skipping classes regularly, neglecting her schoolwork, and disappearing for days at a time. Her parents, desperate to understand what was happening, tried to talk to her, but Isla didn't want to hear it. They didn't understand her, and she didn't have the patience to explain. To her, they were just part of the system she was trying to break free from. By the time she was 18, Isla was living for the thrill of the next night, the next party, the next reckless decision. She couldn't remember the last time she'd cared about school, about the future, or even about herself. The people she hung out with, the places they went, were no longer just a way to have fun. They were her escape from everything she didn't want to face. But no one could outrun their consequences forever. It came one night when Isla made the fatal mistake of thinking she was invincible. She was at a party on the outskirts of town, surrounded by flashing lights and loud music. It had been a good night, too good. She was drunk, high, and feeling indestructible. She'd been driving with a group of friends when the night took a turn. One of her friends dared her to drive, saying she could handle it. They all laughed and coaxed her into it. Isla climbed into the driver's seat, a grin on her face, thinking she could handle it. She wasn't even scared. She slammed the gas pedal, feeling the engine roar beneath her. For a moment, it felt like she was flying. But it wasn't long before the road curved sharply, and her reflexes were too slow. The car veered off the road and crashed into a tree. It was an instant disaster. The car crumpled, airbags deploying, glass shattering. Isla's head slammed against the steering wheel, and everything went black. When she woke up, she was in the hospital, surrounded by the sterile smell of antiseptic and the buzz of machines. Her body ached, bruised and broken, but the pain of her injuries wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the silence in their room, the absence of the loud laughter and music that had defined her life. Her parents were there, their faces pale and filled with worry. The weight of their disappointment was more crushing than any physical pain. The accident was a wake-up call, but it came too late. Isla had burned so many bridges, lost her friends, lost the trust of her parents, and destroyed the path that had once been laid out before her. The girl who had once been full of potential now found herself stuck in a world of consequence. Her friends drifted away, some even blaming her for the accident, while others moved on with their lives. Her parents were devastated, heartbroken not only by the crash but by the realization that they had lost the daughter they once knew. The road to recovery was long, but it wasn't just the physical healing that Isla struggled with. She had to learn to live with herself again, but the guilt of what she had done hung over her like a shadow. The wild nights that had once felt so freeing now seemed like a distant, destructive fantasy. She could never undo what had happened, and every time she looked at her reflection, she saw the broken pieces of her old life staring back at her. Years passed, and Isla tried to rebuild. She got a job, went to therapy, and tried to reconnect with her family. But it was never the same. The town she had once rebelled against now felt like a prison she couldn't escape. Her past haunted her in every corner, in every glance from an old friend or neighbor. She tried to pick up the pieces of her life, but every day she felt the weight of what she had lost. Isla learned the hardest lesson anyone can learn, that running from who you are, running from the life that's been given to you, only leads to destruction. The reckless choices she had made had torn everything apart, and now she was left to sift through the rubble. She could never go back to who she was, and the future she had once dreamed of was beyond her reach. Her story became a cautionary tale for others in the town. People whispered about Isla, about how she had everything going for her and threw it all away. It was a warning, a reminder that sometimes the things we crave the most, the freedom, the excitement, can destroy us if we aren't careful. Isla was left to live with that truth. She had once dreamed of a life beyond the walls of her small town, but she had ended up trapped by her own choices, a lesson in the cost of a wayward life. Please subscribe, like, comment, and share. Darlington solves it.